clear on this agreement?
Now.
Site plan. Flat.
We will call to order the Tuesday, August 28th Gardner Planning Commission. If everybody please rise and join Commissioner Manley in the flag salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If Commissioner Lavella could start us with the roll call.
Lavella here.
Copeland here.
Godwin here.
Burnett here.
Manley here. Pop here.
Roberts here.
And there is a quorum present. This evening we have 2 items on our consent agenda. Would any commissioner like to bring either item off of the consent agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to bring FP 1204 off the agenda.
Okay. So at this time, if there's no disagreement, then we will approve the consent agenda, number 1, and we will pull item number 2 off of the consent agenda. And we will start with it. Are there any specific questions you had before we get started, or did you?
Yeah, the only question I had had to do with the new tracks B, C, and D, and the fact that we have some landlocked tracks now, which is always a concern, and would like to consider granting or requiring easements from the appropriate lots that exist to those new tracks, which would effectively make it undesirable to ever have different land ownership, which was a concern that was mentioned in the staff report.
Was there a question in there?
Yeah, I would like to consider making that a stipulation of the approval. Are there any comments from staff on that idea?
I think that probably my main comment would be that since those lots are not owned by the school district and not part of this plat, that I'm not quite sure how we would make that happen. I guess the school district would get the easements. They would have to take it upon themselves to get the easements before they could record the plat. I know they're in kind of a hurry to get the plat recorded, though, so that's where I'm not as sure about that particular. Joel, I don't know if you want to comment.
If you could enter your name in for the record, please. I think we're all
Done this once before. Joel Riggs, 11250 Corporate Avenue, Lenexa, Kansas. Schaefer, Klein, Warren, on behalf of the district. Commissioner Godwin, those plats, the plat is being reconfigured for one reason and one reason only. In an effort to preserve the tree line that is along the west property line that the district owns and significant fencing challenges to tie to existing, it is the intention of the district to deed those tracts to the individual property owners. They will own them, they will maintain them, and the fence will be on the eastern side of each one of those tracts. We have agreements with the property owners. They've signed memorandums of understanding. They've been approved by the school district board, and ultimately, if this plat is recorded, we will prepare deeds, and actually they're being prepared today, and they will be deeded once this plat is recorded.
Is there not a restriction on landlocked plats, though?
Those tracts will become part of that ownership.
They're non-buildable tracts. They would not be considered lots. If somebody owned them, they wouldn't be able to build a house on them because they don't meet our requirements,
right,
and they're labeled as tracts. That's a pretty common situation in neighborhoods where, HOA owns a tract or something like that. So we do have about not creating lots that don't meet the regulations, but since these are tracts, I think that this would be okay to do. I'm wondering if what might be a better idea as far as trying to get these lots combined is to somehow facilitate the property owners adding those pieces together.
Well, I don't have a real problem with them even being separate tracts because clerk and the register of deeds for the county manage those and link them together. That's not so much my concern, and replatting, I think, isn't really even necessary. But I know it's a concern for having the landlocked parcels. And I think my concerns are alleviated by the fact that, yes, it's not a buildable lot. It is simply a tract that's going to be granted.
Much like an open space tract in a subdivision adjacent to, it was really an effort spurned by the residents themselves, is an effort not to remove the trees. The district decided to move the fence. In moving the fence, they didn't want to have to maintain the property in between two fences, because there is a gap in some areas. So we tried to do this so the properties would be maintained by people that have access to those tracts, physical access. But the district's fence will be a 6-foot fence. It'll be on the eastern side of those tracts and essentially delineate the open space football athletic fields to the south of the new campus and those tracts that will be owned by the individual property.
I think it's an amicable solution. That was just the only concern I had.
There were other reasons to redo the plat, much to do with easements. Actually, your staff has asked for additional road right-of-way on the south side of Grand Street to facilitate a future trail that will be constructed as part of the Grand Street improvements. So this isn't the only reason, but Amy is correct. In an effort to get some things cleaned up and moving forward, the district did want to get this done as quickly as possible.
I think you've addressed my concerns, so I'd be happy to make a motion to approve the final plat FP 1204 and forward to City Council with recommendation for approval and acceptance of easements and right-of-way.
Second. Thank
Did you also include the stipulations in there as well?
Did we have stipulations in there? If there were staff stipulations, then I certainly amend my motion to include the staff stipulations.
Need a second on the amendment?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. It's been moved by Commissioner Godwin and seconded by Commissioner Copeland to approve the final plats on the following, with FP 12-04 and forward it to the City Council with recommendation to accept the easements and right-of-ways. First, we have to vote on the amendment, which was adding the stipulations A through D. Is there any discussion on that? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. The amendment carries. So now the motion reads that we approve the final plat for Gardner Edgerton ESMS Campus Revised FP 12-04 and forward it to City Council with recommendation to accept the easements and right-of-ways subject to stipulations A through D. Is there any discussion on the amended motion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Our next item this evening is conduct a public hearing to consider a conditional use permit for the motor vehicle tow lot to be located at 29960 West 191st Street. Application is filed by Marvin Vale on behalf of Marvin's Tow Service. At this time, is there a staff presentation or any additional information from our last meeting, as this was a tabled item?
This item, I don't have a presentation for it prepared, but there really haven't been any changes. We did receive a new plan, which is different. However, this is one that staff has not yet had an opportunity to review. We just received this late last week. And there's still a lot of additional information that we don't have. The applicant is only allowed to request one continuance of a public hearing before the Planning Commission. They have already done that. Staff has recommended one in the past and does not have a limit on the Planning Commission or staff recommending continuances. So in this case, because we do also have the limitation on successive applications that would prevent them from reapplying within a year, I am recommending one more continuance to allow them time to get that additional information to us. So I'm not sure what the delay is, but it's on their end as far as getting the information to us. So I'm sure they would appreciate that if we would, for that cause, grant the continuance to September. Hopefully they'll have everything in order by then, and we are still within that 6-month time period from the public hearing date, well within that.
Is that long enough?
That I'm not certain, because they assured me that the previous continuance to August 28th would definitely be more than enough, and it wasn't. So I've sort of urged them along to hurry up, because I'm only continuing it for 1 month right now.
And that is something that we can discuss and decide as well, if we wish to continue it or not.
Yeah, if you would like to continue it to a later date, that would be acceptable as well.
Is there anybody from the applicant that would like to speak regarding this application? If not, we will open the public hearing at this time. Is there anybody from the public that would like to speak regarding this application? No.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we close the public hearing.
Should we close it, or should we
Continue.
discuss and continue? Does,
Close the public comments.
okay.
Second.
Normally, we continue it at this point, yeah.
Yeah, continue the public hearing
Right.
to,
So we can
I don't-
discuss right now if that's what we wish to do. I do not see a reason why we shouldn't, but it is in our right not to continue it because it is our choice. So, we have a motion on the table, and was there a second? Did anybody second it?
I think Karen said.
No, I think it was me.
Okay, was it? Okay.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Sorry, I was thinking through whether we're gonna continue it or,
Yeah.
so.
My
Someone did. I
motion
knew I
is
heard.
to close the public comments. We'll take action on the public hearing later. You opened it to the floor to public comments, right?
We open it, but we need to continue.
We have to continue the public hearing for the
Right.
recording
That's
We've,
part.
we've
separate
actually
issue.
done this both ways in the past, so there's some confusion. Most recently, we have been, instead of closing the public comment period, we've been continuing the public hearing at the end of the discussion and just continuing everything to the next meeting. Because technically, the public hearing is never closed until action is taken on the item.
Right. And I'm not wanting to close the public hearing. You've opened the floor to public comment, right?
Well, he
I
opened the public hearing.
hearing, so we either have to continue the
I'll-
public hearing.
I'll withdraw my motion.
And I move that we continue.
Okay. And then is there,
Okay, yeah,
no, which date, sorry?
I don't know. What's the,
September 25th.
this is September 25th Planning Commission meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. It's been moved by Commissioner Lavella and seconded by Commissioner Copeland that we continue CUP 12-03 to the September 25th, 2012 meeting. Is there any discussion on that? If not, all in favor say aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. We will continue the public hearing to our next meeting.
Consideration of the item, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
And just for clarification, for anyone who might want to know, Chairman Burnett has stated that he no longer has the conflict that he had in the past, so that's why he did not recuse himself tonight, so.
Our next item is amendments to Chapter 18, Period 170, Signs. Conduct a public hearing to consider amendments to Chapter 18, Period 170, Signs of Title 18 zoning regulations. Staff have information or a presentation?
There's not a presentation for this one. I had really hoped to finish this one up and have it before you tonight for consideration. However, I was counting on assistance from the consultant who we had contracted with to help me, and then that contract was not renewed. So as a result of that, I had to choose between the signs and the landscaping for how to spend my time. I determined that the other amendments were more important because we'd adopted storage regulations and landscape regulations that were dependent upon the definitions getting adopted as well as the design standards, which were not yet done. So As a result, that became the priority. Got those. We don't have a lot on the agenda for September other than what's been continued, so if I can, I'll finish up. Our new city administrator has stated that, ideally these things would be done as part of a comprehensive plan, which I would agree with that. Ideally, we would have gotten to do the comprehensive plan first. Since we haven't, I don't know if there's a little bit of confusion over what the priorities should be right now, but I think since this one, we've come so far with it, we do need to finish it up pretty soon, so. Requesting that you continue the public hearing and consideration to September 25th. Hopefully that will give me enough time to finish.
Is that enough time, or do we need to do it to the October meeting, based on plans and stuff coming before this body?
I mean, we could do it to October. If I don't get done in September, we can just continue it again. I don't know that I'd want to continue it past October. But I think that since there were no new applications for September, I think we're hopefully in good shape to finish that up.
Are there any questions before we open the public hearing? At this time, we will reopen the public hearing for amendments to Chapter 18, Period 170, signs. Are there any members from the public that would like to speak regarding this amendment?
Mr. Chair, I move that we continue the public hearing for amendments Chapter 18.170 signs to the September 25th, 2012 meeting.
Second.
It has been moved by Commissioner Manley and seconded by Commissioner Pop that we continue the public hearing in consideration of these amendments to the September 25th, 2012 meeting. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. The public hearing will be continued. Our final agenda item this evening is amendments to Title 18 zoning. Conduct a public hearing to consider amendments to Title 18 zoning. And I believe staff has a presentation, and we all received information on this one.
Yes, and this is just a brief presentation, but
Not gonna have the same problems the city council had in the 20th, are we?
Oh, and I would jinx
That was one
oh,
annoying
there we go.
noise.
Okay. Okay, so what I've done for the presentation is just sort of summarize the things that were in bits and pieces, and then I'll just pull up the document and kind of walk through it for the rest of it. So the first change, which will actually be done by a separate ordinance due to the requirements, the legal requirements for adopting a separate document by reference. That will be done separately. It will update the Gardner Design Standards to the August 28th, 2012 version. The new version simply adds the Landscape Design Standards chapter, which we'll talk about more later. And it's not working again. Need the next slide. Might have to go sit where I can just do it on the computer. Tell you what, the presentation doesn't really probably help that much anyway if you've got your packet in front of you, so I'm just going to go sit back down, or actually I'll stay here and we'll go through it here. So, I do. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay, so the definitions. We're adding definitions for landscaping and storage yards, and then a few other definitions. I did also throw in there on the next slide the definition for family, which I had come across because of one part that referenced back. It was sort of a chain of things. So I went back to the family definition and noticed that most cities include adoption in that definition, and ours didn't have that, so I added that in. Also, the reason the decision-making authority is highlighted there is because that's one that was in the information that was added to the packets last night. So for anybody who didn't have time to review that information before tonight, or anyone in the audience tonight who has not seen that information, I wanted to point that out. So the decision-making authority, then the other definitions, oh, it's working again. All right, so we've got family, ground cover hedge, invasive, large shrub. Added some pictures to help with the definition for parking blocks, since that's one that I think will be difficult for people to understand without that. And then street, I did change, or I'm recommending a change to that definition as well that we already have, but it refers to a right-of-way, whereas we also include, when we use the term street, we frequently are referring to private streets or, where situations where we don't necessarily have a right-of-way defined, and so to define it as the street itself versus, I think everyone's pretty clear on what a right-of-way is, which is the phrase we use when that's what we mean. So, were there any questions on the definitions? Okay. Or the update to the Gardner Design Standards. And Doreen, I don't know if you can pull up the, let's pull up the landscape design standards. To go through that one, I provided a document that sort of highlighted the changes from the draft that we had looked at a month or so ago. And there's a few things that were added and deleted and changed. On the first page, just added a statement about landscaping is a vital part of site and development plans. It must be considered during the early stages of site design. I think that's what we were getting at with these changes to the landscaping, is that landscaping is too often planned as an afterthought. It's, okay, we've got the building, we've got the parking lot, now let's squeeze in some trees to meet the requirements, and if they can't squeeze it in, they, ask for some sort of exception. And so since we didn't say explicitly anywhere that we were expecting them to plan the landscaping from the start, I thought it was important to say that. Then on page 2, we've got, this sort of goes along with one of the proposed changes to Chapter 18165 about exceptions and how exceptions are considered, and they should not be requested where not warranted, but does give the authority for the decision-making authority to grant such exceptions instead of sending through the Board of Zoning Appeals, because it's very difficult to grant any sort of landscaping exception through the Board of Zoning Appeals due to the statutory requirements for granting a variance. And there are situations where it would make sense to grant exceptions. So then we have on the next page added a required tree or shrub with an easement or right-of-way. They can put trees and shrubs within rights-of-way. That's something new. We currently don't allow that. They do have to have city approval for that, so that we can make sure it's not going to interfere with the traffic or site distances or easements or utilities. And so, but I added a statement there that if it's allowed there, they need to have an alternate location where if that in the future needs to be removed or replaced, they have a place where they can go plant a new one so that they still meet our minimum requirements. They don't have to plant it there now, but it just has to be there in case they need to in the future. And we do acknowledge in here that, all such plantings within the rights-of-way would be at the property owner's own risk, so they acknowledge that. Then we have commercial businesses in the downtown district. encouraged to extend functional displays on the sidewalk. So that's really just sort of a rephrasing of what we already had. Then clarifying that it's called a right-of-way use permit that they would need to apply for. Then on page 4, I just, and 5, I just deleted the parentheses because it was unnecessary to have that there. Property perimeter, midway down page 5, that was just changed a little bit for the wording. Then the standards added that the community development director can allow the number of trees and shrubs required to be reduced where there are berms, walls, fences, or other features that are screening that same perimeter. We had that in there, but I didn't think it was completely clear on how that process worked for when that would be reduced and why and who would make that decision. The community development director is in our zoning ordinance. In the very beginning, it states that anytime we use the phrase community development director, it also means or designee. So that could potentially be someone other than the director themselves. Under parking area, we've got just a rephrasing there of the first paragraph. The reason the sentence there at the top of page 6 was removed, about 6.5% of the interior parking area, that's in our code, and that's more of a code type regulation, not a design standard. So trying to eliminate some duplication here so that if things ever change, we don't have to go back and try to find it everywhere. So took that out. Interior area of the parking lot must be calculated in square feet and identified on the landscape plan for the site. That's just a rephrasing of above. And then the standards, most of this, there's a lot of stuff that was removed, and this gets back to not repeating what we already have in the code that really is more of a code requirement. So then moving on to that. One thing that I did change a little bit was lighting for parking lots. I didn't specifically say that parking lot lights could not be located within landscape islands or peninsulas with shade trees. That's what we had before, and then it went on to say lighting may be contained within landscape medians provided that the illumination was not obstructed. I don't think, I think since our concern is just that illumination is not obstructed, I just sort of stated that more simply. So, not too much else changed from that point. In the actual final document, I added some pictures, so hopefully y'all had a chance to see the actual final version of the Gardner Design Standards there. Did you have any questions or concerns about the changes that were made to the design standards? Because I know we didn't really talk too much about what was going to change there previously. Okay. And then moving on then to Chapter 18165, Landscaping and Screening. The one you have that you submitted, or that I submitted to you last night, we have, on the first page I added 3. One I had put in your original packets, and then 2 were in the new version. I wanted to sort of clarify on our purpose and intent. We want to screen certain unsightly views from public streets or adjoining properties. I saw that in several other codes. Then I also noticed that we didn't have anything about encouraging preservation of existing plant material. And then I thought we needed to point out that we wanted to promote landscaping as an important part of the plan that needs to be considered from the start. So added those things in. Then the reason I deleted the paragraph right there toward the top of the screen, it says appropriate number, amount of shrubs, ground cover, turf area plantings should be included in each project determined by the design criteria within the project as established by the Board of Zoning Appeals. That didn't really make sense to me as far as how our process works, because the Board of Zoning Appeals doesn't determine design criteria for a project. So I just deleted that out. I think we have enough in there as far as how the process should go. And then right below that, all plans submitted for approval of landscape plan shall have the following information included. I deleted space for endorsement by Planning Commission and the governing body because we don't normally have the Planning Commission and the governing body endorse landscape plans. The location, size, and common name of all existing plant materials, I added with any proposed preservation measures identified because we were requiring that in a later part of the code. Then on J, that was really just since we added a definition of trees, I was just removing the part we didn't need there. And moving on down, this was, again, just a rephrasing that top paragraph. And then, okay, exceptions and changes, that was one of the parts that I changed kind of the most, so we'll talk about that. This says a landscape plan may be approved that doesn't strictly comply with one or more provisions of the chapter, provided the decision-making authority, which that part I added or changed last night from Community Development Director, since we added that definition, determines that such exception or deviation is warranted due to an exceptional circumstance or significant constraint. Proposed deviations shall be clearly identified on the plan with suggested alternatives or compromises and accompanied by a written description explaining why the deviations are being requested. And then the Community Development Director shall have the authority to approve changes to an approved landscape plan when warranted due to unforeseen circumstances. Because a lot of times after the plan is approved by the Planning Commission, utilities will get moved or something will change, and then it requires us to change the plan. So it's important to have that in there. And then the first paragraph didn't really change too much except to rephrase it to be a little bit more along the lines of what some of the other cities around here have. Eliminates a little bit of confusion. So that just replaced paragraphs crossed out below. And then size, I took out the conifers because I changed to evergreen trees, which would include conifers. I also did change the small deciduous trees to at least 6 feet in height. We were at 4 feet, significantly under what everyone else in the area was requiring. The other cities that I looked at were requiring at least 6 feet, or in some cases more. So went ahead and bumped that up to 6. That is one content change. Shrubs, instead of size optional, most cities do have an actual minimum size specified, so I went with one of the lower ones there because I didn't think we wanted to be, since we had size optional before, I didn't want to change it to 2 feet or something that was more significant. But 18 inches, I think, is a reasonable size, minimum size for a shrub. Then native grass, just seeding as appropriate. I changed from turf grass sod as necessary. Lawn and turf grass areas shall be planted with species suitable as permanent lawns and gardener. This is similar to what other cities in the area have, to sort of specify where this needs to go, and then it needs to be sodded unless there's seeding that's otherwise approved by the development director. So moving on down from there, let's see. We have sort of changed from zoning to uses on the internal site part. And instead of saying office, commercial, and industrial, that, there could be institutional uses or other things, so just non-residential, and then we have mixed uses potentially too, so to sort of include everything, hopefully, in there. And I thought the use was probably more important than the zoning, for that particular regulation. So same thing for just below that. And then I took out the sodding requirement because I moved that up to the minimum planting requirements, which I felt was a better place for it. Then moving on down from there, the table kind of got cut and messed with the formatting. Then we have a new change from last night. In addition to the screening requirements found in Section 100C. That's when the property is in commercial or industrial next to the residential zone property, additional perimeter landscaping may be required if deemed by the decision-making authority to be necessary. So again, adding that, changing from community development director to decision-making authority. And then community development director may allow the number of trees and shrubs required along the property perimeter to be reduced. So this goes back to what we were talking about with the design standards. So we do have a little bit of duplication still between the design standards and the code chapter, but for the actual number of requirements, I tried to keep those just in the code. Then moving down from there, again, if deemed by the community development director to be necessary was added because it didn't state how that, who could require it and when and how that would work. So to block undesirable views from public areas and adjacent properties, just trying to clarify what was meant by that because I thought it was a little bit confusing the way we had it currently worded. Credits for preservation of existing vegetation. This is completely different from what we had before. This would give credits specifically for, based on the size of the vegetation. So this would also allow credits for shrubs. So if you had a 12-foot tall lilac bush that was really great, it seems to me like you ought to get credit for that as well and not have to plant a new shrub when you're saving that one. So so this does allow for that. Before it only applied to trees. Existing vegetation does have to be at least twice the minimum size to get the credit, because it needs to be something that's, substantial as far as, saving a little tiny 18-inch shrub probably doesn't justify a credit. So then a preserved plant that's more than 4 times the minimum size required to be planted gets credits on a 2-for-1 basis. But again, wanted to make sure that there was room for it to be replaced with 2 plants if, the huge tree that they just saved dies tomorrow and they have to replace it to meet the requirements. Because we are increasing the maintenance requirements with the new chapter as well. And so it's going to be important that we can make sure that the sites are able to maintain their ability to meet the requirements. Then I also have that the community development director can limit the number of credits received based on how well the preserved vegetation meets the purpose and intent of the chapter. If someone saves a little cluster of trees in one corner along a property perimeter, that's not serving the purpose of the property perimeter landscaping requirement. So you wouldn't get a full credit for all 20 trees. However, if they saved 20 trees that were all spread along the property perimeter and serving that screening requirement, then it makes sense for them to get the credit for that. So basically, it has to do with how well what they're saving meets what it was, the requirement was put in place for. So that's quite a bit different. Then, and feel free to stop me if you have questions or comments. I'm just kind of racing through. So, parking perimeter landscaping. Change from last night in red. Landscaping is required along the perimeter of a parking lot where that edge of the parking lot is adjacent to a public or private street, sidewalk, trail, area of open space, or another property. Decision-making authority can waive the parking perimeter landscaping where property perimeter landscaping provides similar or greater screening. This came, I probably should mention, there's a lot of changes here. And I know we had a lot of hard work from Dave Knopick on what we had adopted before. So I did run these past him as well, and he's had a chance to review and comment on all but the very latest changes, and he was in agreement with everything, had some great comments. One of the things here was I was a little bit confused on what he was trying to say, the way it was previously worded, and I thought that it meant something different from what he was intending by it. So this rephrases that to hopefully make that more clear. Also added from your first packet, shall provide screening sufficient to block headlights from shining directly into adjacent properties or public areas. And then it does allow for changes due to slope of the land or characteristics of the adjacent use. If you're next to a residential area, you may need some additional height. If the ground is sloped a certain way and nobody can see it, then maybe you don't. And so this allows for those kinds of adjustments. Then for the berm, I just sort of changed the wording there, landscape with trees and shrubs. I actually lowered the hedge height from 3 to 2.5 feet high. If you like it at 3, I don't have a lot of concern about that. I just thought that 2.5 feet high probably made more sense for a parking lot perimeter, unless you were trying to achieve a full screening. But for the wall and the fence, we were saying no more than 3 feet high. So to me, it made more sense to kind of have those in the same ballpark for the height we were looking for. So scrolling on down. Parking blocks separated on all sides by landscape areas, just sort of a rephrasing of that. Instead of requiring pedestrian walkways within a landscape median, they're on C to be at least 5 feet wide. Instead, just stating that they need to meet the Americans with Disabilities Act requirements. In case those ever change in the future, or also because with a 10-foot wide median with a 5-foot wide sidewalk, it doesn't leave a whole lot of room for landscaping, whereas you could still meet the ADA requirements with a 3-foot wide sidewalk as long as you have the passing zones every so often. So I think that allows perhaps for more landscaping in that area while still accommodating people with disabilities. Decorative fences and walls that separate parking blocks no more than 3 feet high, bordered by landscaping on each side. Barriers such as fences, walls, or continuous landscaping shall have logical periodic breaks to allow pedestrian access to adjacent parking lots, sidewalks, or buildings. We had a similar statement to that under the property perimeter landscaping, but I felt that this would also be a factor, probably more so a factor for parking perimeters, as people frequently are trying to walk between parking lots and that sort of thing. So just a slight rephrasing there. I think we're almost done. Okay, building facade landscaping. This changed a little bit. Mostly just a rephrasing here and clarifying if the facade is sufficiently screened by property perimeter landscaping, then it can be exempt from building facade plantings. This was another one where what the intent of what was written into the current code was not what I had interpreted it as, so I thought it was important to rephrase that, hopefully make it a little bit more clear. So that is also related to the eliminated paragraph below that. Then we have, instead of, on letter B, the no landscape area shall be less than 5 feet wide. I changed it to average less than 5 feet wide. I don't think we're looking for 5 foot by 5 foot square boxes for our landscape areas. I think, it's good for them to be able to have some curves and some character to the landscape area. So this would allow that to average no less than 5 feet wide in any direction, and then clarified that the 10 feet wide is at the trunk of the shade tree, so it just has to go out 10 feet wide for that portion. It doesn't have to be 10 foot all the way around. Then screening requirements for trash bins and service areas. Again, change this, just the wording here. For single-family and duplex residential uses, they're probably not going to have a trash bin or a service area to begin with, but those are accepted here. Institutional and multifamily residential and commercial office and industrial projects is what we had before, and again, there could be other projects that didn't necessarily fit into those categories, so this just specifically exempts single-family and duplex, which was what the intent was. Some new changes from last night's draft in red there, ground and wall-mounted equipment. I noticed that the title of that section was ground and wall-mounted equipment, but we didn't actually reference wall-mounted equipment in it. So I just clarified that that was included, and that the, such equipment would be screened from public view with fencing, architectural elements, and/or landscaping. The way it was previously worded, pretty much that it had to be screened with fencing or something. I think that in a lot of cases, some shrub screening mechanical equipment might be a better option than fencing. In some cases, it might need to be fencing. It just kind of depends on the equipment, but, you know, air conditioner, if that's all they have and they want to put some shrubs around it and it fully screens it, I don't think that that's a concern, personally. And scrolling on down from there, that would be everything. This was the one definition that we had highlighted in the presentation that got added, so. I think that covers everything. Are there any questions, comments, concerns, anything I missed?
Did a good job.
A lot of information
Mhm.
to take in, so thank you.
Yeah.
And this is the recommendation that we're considering tonight with zoning 18 changes, right?
I'm sorry?
This, with its modifications, is what we're considering tonight with the amendments to...
That's my recommendation, is that you consider the amendments. I haven't prepared the actual ordinance yet for you to look at, but basically I would be creating an ordinance with the amendments as they were revised last night with the changes to the packet, so,
With these.
yes.
So this is what we would be forwarding to the city council.
You would be forwarding that to the city council, except, again, staff will put it into an ordinance format, obviously, for them.
Okay.
And then, so that would include the definitions and the landscaping. Your recommendation will also include, even though it's going to be done by separate ordinance, it would also include the ordinance to adopt the new version of the design standards. So if you feel differently about that one for some reason, you can separate out those motions, but one motion can forward all of those together.
The landscape design standards, not the garden.
The sample ordinance that creates the language that adopts the new version of the design standards in Chapter 1805. That was that first part we went over in the presentation.
Okay. Well, I had a couple questions as we were going through this. One is it's on the third page of the landscaping and screening, 18.165. Talks about the community development director shall have the authority to approve changes and to an approved landscape plan when warranted due to unforeseen conditions. I agree with that, but I'd be more comfortable with language that also tells an applicant or a citizen that they have the ability to appeal to the planning commission, and that the planning commission, or that the community development director may also defer to the planning commission if they so choose.
Okay.
I've seen that in language in ordinances that we've had before, where it kind of helps the planning director to be able to defer if they're not able to come to an amicable agreement with an applicant.
Okay, so you would keep that sentence and then add decisions of the community development director may be appealed to the planning commission, and then furthermore, the community development director may, I'm not quite sure how I'd phrase that.
May
off the top.
defer to the planning commission.
May defer such decisions to the planning commission.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay,
I think-
so
Defer or forward, which sounds better there, which,
I would probably say defer.
Mhm.
Okay, so it would read then, the community development director shall have the authority to approve changes to an approved landscape plan when warranted due to unforeseen conditions. The community development director may, do you say,
May defer such decisions to the planning commission.
I'm just wondering if we need to say when those would be deferred, to give
I
people
think
some
that-
idea of, are they gonna have to go back to the planning commission or not?
I think it would be on a
I think
case-by-case
it's,
basis.
I think the decision to defer is left up to the director, community development director.
Well, I think that's fine. I think we need to probably say, such decisions may be deferred to the planning commission at the community development director's discretion. Something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the applicant has the ability to appeal to the planning commission if they don't agree with the decision, so
Yeah.
everyone's covered that way. Not like that.
Okay, so after that sentence that's already there, then we'd have, such decisions may be deferred to the planning commission at the community development director's discretion. Decisions of the community development director may be appealed to the planning commission. So, okay. I just want to make sure we have the wording right so that we can go ahead and move it forward tonight if that's all that's changing.
Yeah. The other question I had was on H in the next section, which is 18-165-060H, talks about turf, sod versus seeding, and it says the community development director could approve seeding in certain conditions, and I'm wondering what parameters the community development director could consider.
And that's something that's in our current code as well. And typically, seeding is not approved, especially with all the problems we've had lately with the situations where it has been approved. But there are some situations, for example, if there is a particularly large lawn area, having the sod next to the building and sort of around the area that's more publicly viewed is going to be a little bit more important, maybe than having an entire field that was sodded, for example. Now, that being said, of course, a field that was not landscaped would not have to be sodded because it would be left in its natural state. So I'm not sure if that clarifies or not.
And once you accept all of these changes, it's going to renumber and letter all of these, because this section jumps all around. You skip C, you skip I.
Oh, yeah, the numbering and lettering will get fixed.
Okay.
Caught it in some places and not in others.
Well, my concern really is, I don't mind having the requirement in there for, multifamily and commercial type developments, for single-family developments. I think that's often is a choice for the homeowner to make. Personally, I'm not a fan of sodding. I'd rather seed. And with a homeowner being there to take care of it, you avoid the problems that would be a concern in a large development. That's just my concern with removing that, or what would be considered. As I recall, when we built our house, we had to get special permission to seed instead of sod.
Okay. I think what happened, our current regulations read, all turf areas, including adjacent rights-of-way, shall be sodded at initial installation, and I think the loss of the at initial installation is probably what's causing the concern there.
Where was that at?
Well, that was eliminated on the next page under B, internal sites, that third paragraph that was deleted. That's within the current code. But when that got rephrased, I didn't carry over the at initial installation. I believe I copied that from another city's regulations. So if we just add that back in, would that alleviate your concerns? Because the intent was not for, if I need to replant my lawn because it died, the intent's not that everybody has to put down sod. Seed would be acceptable in that. This is for when the property is first developed and you have just a dirt lot that you need to put the sod down, and typically a single-family house would be done with sod in that case.
He's wanting the option, I believe, that two seed in the initial. Is that correct, Greg?
Yes.
Okay, so from the initial.
Yeah,
From the
if you build a new house on a new lot, and you would rather seed than sod. Here, our zoning ordinance is going to remove that ability.
But you could still request an exception.
Yeah, I think on a single family, I don't know that we would, I think that's,
I mean, really, I think this probably allows more flexibility than what we have in the current regulations, because as it stands today, the community development director or, it says all turf area shall be sodded at initial installation, community development director or representative may allow utilization of seed when deemed necessary, which in most cases I wouldn't think that would be necessary to do seed.
yeah. almost
So I think
never
that'd be a hard case to
necessary.
prove. So, maybe, I don't know how the rest of the planning commission